The Bible is a large book, but it doesn't have to be intimidating. Watch our How to Read the Bible series and see how
or this super dope new shoe I'm wearing. These are called the Broken Ankle 5s. Super rare, super expensive, super sweaty. Smell is weird. But I broke my ankle playing. So here's the deal. If one of you ever says to me, Brogan, I don't think you care about us, I'm just going to kick you with the foot that I broke playing gaga ball with you. Deal? Yeah? I think that's fair. No questions at this time. No questions at this time. Alrighty, we're going to continue going. We've talked about, can someone tell me some of the topics we've talked about so far as we've been going through the Bible? We hit on Job. Good job, Cooper. What's another one? Yes. Cain and Abel. Genesis. What part of Genesis? Everything has been Genesis. So yeah, we're in Genesis. I guess that's technically right. Okay. What's another story? Noah. Yep. We're missing the first week. Actually, that was the second week. What was the first week? Boom. And we're talking about a man named Abraham. If you've ever heard of Abraham, I want you to turn to your neighbor and either say yes or no. Go. Okay, now if you've met Abraham, I want you to turn to your neighbor and say, yes, I've met him, or no, I haven't. Go. Abe. Actually, so crazy thing about Abraham, that wasn't, when you first meet him, his name isn't Abraham, it's Abram, which sounds terrible. Abraham's a way better name. Yeah, good job. Why'd you look? Sarai. So today, the title is Abraham and Isaac because we're going to talk about those two, but we're going to start with Abraham. So, I have made a slide of the entire story of Abraham's life. All the chapters that you can read about Abraham. Now, here's what you guys need to know. There's a lot about this guy. There are 15 chapters about this guy. Okay? All the way from, have you guys heard of the story of the Tower of Babel? Have you heard of that story? Maybe you don't know about it, but you've heard about it. It starts there and it goes all the way till Abraham dies. So, go ahead and put that slide up. Starting, next one. There it is. I want you to take a photo. Don't write all of this down because this is going to be super, super long to write all of it down. Take a photo. But if you want to read about the story of Abraham, you need, that is kind of your guide. 11, Tower of Babel. 12, God calls him at the age of 75. Abram was called at 75. Quentin, how old are you? Okay. Quentin, how old are you? Cooper, how old are you? 14. Kess, how old are you? Adelaide, how old are you? Okay, so we got 14, 28, 49. How old are you? 11. We got 60. 12. Benny? Okay, all of those people added up barely are older than Abraham was when he was called. 75. That's really old. You guys know a 75-year-old? Or somebody around the age of 75? 75 is, I think, when you start going from the cool grandpa to like, I think you need to go lay down for a little bit. Kind of like when a doctor is like, you know what? Shh, go lay down. Okay? 75. Then in chapter 13 and 14, we meet Abram and his nephew Lot. There's a lot that goes on there with Lot, hence why his name was Lot. 15, we have the covenant. 16, we have Ishmael, who's Abraham's son, but not in the way that God wanted, and they changed their names to Abraham and Sarah. 17, God makes a covenant with Abraham. 18, Abraham pleads with God for Sodom. 19, Sodom and Gomorrah and sin overtaking. This is one of the most prominent of examples of filth, evil, and lustfulness taking over a city. Chapter 20, Abraham lies to a king. In chapter 21, Isaac is born and Ishmael, his other son, is sent away. Chapter 22, Abraham, Isaac, and the altar. 23, Sarah dies. Awkward. 24, Isaac finds a wife. What a guy. And the chapter 25, Abraham, dead. What a life, you know? Just by reading titles of chapters, what a life. So, you'll see from this, there's a lot that we can focus on with Abraham. If I were to sit down and we were to walk through the entire story of Abraham, you would not be leaving until all of you were 75. That'd be a really long time for some of you. Quentin's older than all of us, obviously at 25, but so he might be there before us, but that's a long time. But there's something that I noticed that I want us to focus on. As I started reading through this, I'm reading through the story, and I'm like, okay, God, what do I want to hit on with Abraham? And then I noticed Abraham does something 4 times, at least 4 times in his life, in these stories, and that is he builds an altar. He builds an altar. We see the first altar in Genesis 12:7. We see the second altar in Genesis 12:8. We see the third altar in Genesis 13:18. And we see a fourth altar in Genesis 22. 4 altars. So, in your squads, are you in your squads? No, we are not. Wow. Tell you what, it's a smaller group tonight. We have a leader right here. Let's have a leader go sit with the boys over there. Andrew, you got that? And then Benny, you want to sit with the dudes over here? What do you call you? The 7th graders. No, what's a cooler name? Broskies. Nope, not saying that. Cool. And then we got leaders here. So, I want you to answer this question in your little squads. You ready? What is an altar? Go. All right, so this group let me know they can see and they're cheating. So this group now has to move to that row so they don't cheat anymore. All 4 of them. You got to move. Because Isaac cheated and looked in the back. You got to move. You did. Yep. I like it. Okay, good. Laurel. Okay. Dang. Laurel, did you write the dictionary? Yeah, that was like perfect. All right. Quentin, what do we got? Should I ask Quentin for his answer? Okay, Ian, what do we got? What do we got, Ian? I like it. Wow, you just spelled it. You're really good at spelling. Okay, this group, what do we got? Ooh, yeah, okay, awesome. I like it. All right, here is the actual definition. You ready? Altar, a raised area in a house of worship where people can honor God with offerings. They are structures on which offerings are made to a deity. The word in Hebrew means slaughter. What a super positive word. You know? The Greek word is sacrifice. It's where you sacrifice things. So, you might be wondering why I'm asking you that. Well, we're going to jump into a story. We're going to focus on chapter 22 tonight. So if you have a Bible, open it up to Genesis chapter 22. I realize I just said any chapter. Nope. Genesis chapter 22. Yeah, that'd be good if that's where your Bible is. So, chapter 22, here's what we see. God calls to Abraham and says, by the way, this is how I always imagine God speaking. Hey you. I was always told it's like, hello. I don't think God would do that because that'd be terrifying. Can you imagine like you're laying in your bed and you're just like, bro, I'm trying to sleep, God. Like, no. But if it was like, hey, psst. Like if God's the guy around the corner just like, hey, psst, psst. Hey, Abraham. Huh? Abraham, come here. God tells Abraham, hey, I want you to sacrifice your son. So, not a super fun start to the story. You're like, huh? Wait a minute. That'd be like God waking me up going, hey, you know your cat? I want you to kill it. Be like, I don't think that's God. I don't think that's God. But God literally tells Abraham, I want you to sacrifice your son. Now, that might sound crazy to you, and that might be like, oh, that's hard to hear, but here's what we need to recognize. The son that God was asking Abraham to sacrifice was not just any son. Because this son, his name was Isaac, God had promised Abraham and Sarah, you're going to have a kid. But it took years. It took years for them to have a kid. Abraham was over 100 years old when Isaac was born. I want you to think of that for a second, okay? Imagine Abraham's your age and God's like, you're gonna have a kid, and you're like, awesome, and God's like, but you're gonna be 100. You'd be like, Can you imagine? I know people lived differently back then, but my great grandma was almost 100 years old. I can't imagine her taking care of a baby. She needed help to do basic things. Like, we were worried about her falling next to my little sister falling. Like, Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born, and this was the son that he had been promised by God. But here's what we see in the story. God calls Abraham, and you know what Abraham immediately says? Yes, I'm here. God says, I want you to take your only son, whom you love so much, and I want you to go sacrifice him as a burnt offering. And it doesn't say that Abraham questioned God. It doesn't say that Abraham was like, are you sure? It says the next morning Abraham got up early and immediately went. That he listened without hesitation. That he immediately went. The next morning Abraham got up early. He saddled his donkey and took 2 of his servants with him, along with Isaac. Then they chopped wood for a fire for a burnt offering and set out for the place God had told him about. And then it says on the 3rd day of their journey, it took 3 days to get there. You know how many times I wonder if Abraham was like, do I need to go? But we don't see that. We just see Abraham get up and go. Now, this is crazy to me because when I was growing up and my parents would be like, I need you to do the dishes, I'd be like, are you serious? Mom, I'm playing Xbox. It was like, it took a long time. I was always a kid. Have you ever had your parents leave and they say, when I get back, I want the dishes done? And then they're home, or you're home and you're chilling, and you hear the garage door open and you go, oh no. So now you're like, okay, how can I fake my own death So then they won't get mad that I didn't do the dishes. And then your parents walk in, they're like, did you do the dishes? You're like, crazy thing. A wolf broke into the house. I saved it, though. Wasn't able to do the dishes. And they're like, a wolf broke in and you have no scratches? Pretty quick. Pretty quick. Now, that wouldn't be believable because I'm in a boot. But Abraham immediately got up and went. So, my first point, we need to follow God's commands without hesitation. Now, tonight's sermon is going to feel a little weird because we focus on God, the relational God. We focus on God who's super friendly. We focus on a God who loves us. We focus on a God that shows us grace. All of that's true. But that's not the complete picture of God. Yes, he's the God that loves you. But he's also the God that when he spoke, things were created. We often forget that in the creation story. It's like God created the world, yes, by just going and just speaking. When I was a kid, I once drew a photo of God creating the earth, and it was like God with this ball, and he's like doing this. So my dad's like, dude, that's really good, but that's wrong. God just went, earth. And I was like, are you kidding? And he goes, yeah. So then I was trying to draw God speaking the earth into existence, and it looked like I just drew God burping. And the teacher goes, Brogan, it's not okay to make jokes about God burping. And I was like, I'm not. He's speaking the earth into existence. And my buddy goes, God burped. And then I got in trouble. But God's so powerful, he spoke, and things came to be. We serve a God that is so powerful, but yet we don't focus on that. So, I want you to talk about in your little groups. When is a time that you did what you were told to do and you did it the first time? When is the time you did that? Then, the second question off of that, when is a time that you didn't do what you were supposed to do the first time? And then the third question, how did both stories end? Go. All right. All right, this one we're not going to go around because I don't want to out people, but I want to tell you a story. I'm going to answer these questions for you. So, I was always the procrastinator. I was a rule follower, but I would wait till the last second as a little kid. Like, for example, all of my homework, I always got done on time and turned it in. Always. But I would do it the very last second. So I was a kid in high school. If I had math right after lunch, you know when I do my math homework? Lunch. I had a teacher, you had to turn it in as you walked in. So the kid would be like, if you do it at home, you're not stressing. I'm like, yeah, but at home, I'm so busy. And they're like, with what? And I'm like, things. Life. Playing Madden. Like things that matter, So, always. But I learned that doesn't get you far in life. Because with your parents, they're like, oh my gosh, do this, oh my gosh. But one day when you have a boss, and he says, I need you to do this. You're like, okay. And then you don't get it done, or you get it done just at the last minute, and it looks like you didn't work super hard on it. Your boss isn't going to trust you. You might not lose your job because you technically got it done, but you're not going to earn that trust with your boss. When you get married, if your wife says, hey, would you do this? And you're like, yeah. And then you wait till the literal last second to do it, eventually she's going to think he's not going to get it done. And that's not good. You want people to rely on you. There's a respect that Abraham has with God, his authority figure, that I don't think we're really good at. We love talking about the God that died on a cross, that shows up. It's like the summer camp thing where the speaker's like, if you come down here, God's going to meet you here tonight. And you're like, really? Oh my gosh. And you walk down and you're standing there and you get a hug from your friend and you're both crying and you're sweaty. Like those moments, like those are real moments. God does meet you down there at the altar. But we forget that there's a respect that we need to show to God that we see with Abraham. Because God asked Abraham to do something way tougher than he's asked me to do. God asked me to do things like, hey, that person, you need to be nice to them. Hey, buy that person their lunch. One thing that I love to do and that God put on my heart a long time ago is if I ever have the ability to bless somebody, even with just a meal, to do it. It's not a lot. But you know how people feel when you're like, hey, I bought your lunch today. Don't worry about it. It makes them feel like, wow, that's easy. That's fun. People feel good. This is not going to make Abraham feel good. Losing his only son. But you see this reverence that Abraham shows. We don't do this today. We, and I'm not talking to you guys, we do not do this. We only show respect to the people we like. Is that respect? No, it's not. The world we live in doesn't like respect. The world we live in doesn't like authority. We see in this story that when God speaks, Abraham says yes. And this isn't the first time. Early on in Abraham's life, God says, I want you to move. Abraham immediately gets up and goes. Then God says, I want you to do this. He immediately gets up and does it. He's constantly doing exactly what God wants him to do. And Abraham's not a perfect man. There's a lot of chaos that goes on in his story. But the one consistent thing is Abraham says yes to what God wants. So I have another question for you. Do you respect authority? Do you respect authority, or do you just respect the ones that deserve it? Do you respect authority, Or do you just respect the ones that deserve it? Go. All right. I know that's not a lot of time, but we're going to keep going. We got some more questions we're going to get to. You see Abraham respect God, even when it got difficult, even when the answer wasn't what he wanted. This is something I've struggled with. We all have had teachers that you feel like don't like you, that are mean to you, the teachers that go out of their way to make life really hard, or maybe a coach, maybe a parent. But you know you don't see in the Bible, you don't see a point where God says, you need to show respect to those that are nice to you. You don't see a part where he says, respect everyone you don't like. You don't need to respect them. The Bible says you need to respect all authority. All authority. So if we're supposed to respect all authority, and most of the authority we have are not perfect, how much respect should we be showing to God who is? How much respect should we be showing to the God who created everything? Something else I noticed. The circumstances and situations around Abraham didn't affect how he followed God. It says that when Abraham got up and God told him, he didn't bring everybody. He only brought 2 people and Isaac. And I think Abraham knew if he had brought his wife along, and his wife's standing there, and he goes, I'm going to sacrifice our son, she'd probably be like, are you sure? But it didn't matter. And then later on in the story, you'll see this. Abraham sent the servants away. Because Abraham's not going to let anything around him stop him from doing what God has told him to do. My second point is we have to stop letting our circumstances and situation stop us from following God. Years for God to give him a child, and that didn't stop him. God told Abraham to sacrifice his one and only son. Does that sound familiar, by the way? Have you ever heard of another story where a father sacrifices his one and only son? Hold on to that thought. Abraham doesn't let what's going on around him stop him from doing what God has called him to do. You guys ever heard of peer pressure? Yeah? It's the worst. It's the worst. I've seen peer pressure make the smartest people in my life do the dumbest things. Okay? I've seen peer pressure cause a coworker of mine when I worked at a summer camp to drink a cup of tie-dye water. Water with blue tie-dye in it. And then an hour later wonder why she's not feeling good. What do you mean? You drank paint. I've seen peer pressure turn my roommate who's super shy, super awkward. I've seen peer pressure make him stand up in the lunchroom at college on a table and do a dance. So there's the funny things of peer pressure, right? I've also seen peer pressure where it's not to do that. That's weird. But it's the right thing to do. Doesn't matter. It's weird. I've seen peer pressure stop me from doing things in my own life that I knew God was wanting me to do, but I was embarrassed or fearful of what everyone else around me was going to say. I went to a private Christian school. And when I went to it, I was like, everyone there is going to know Jesus. You know how hard it is to be a Christian at a Christian school? Hey, Quentin, it's pretty hard, huh? You're at a school kids are wearing a hoodie that says Horizon Christian, and they're making fun of you for your faith. Hey, Quinn, Christian school. Kind of hard to be a Christian at, huh? Because the peer pressure sometimes isn't causing you to do certain things. It's causing you not to do certain things. So, I have another question. Have you ever not done something out of peer pressure? Have you ever had something in your life where you're like, I feel like I need to do that, but because of peer pressure, I say no? And then have you, this question is just as important, have you ever pressured someone into doing something or into not doing something? You have 30 seconds. Answer among yourselves. Okay. I know that wasn't a ton of time. I'll give you a couple minutes at the end to keep answering, but we're going to keep going. I saw a TikTok this week that challenged me a little bit. This guy gets to heaven, and I love these TikToks. This guy gets to heaven, and God's like, what's up? And I'm like, I don't think God is going to go, what's up? I don't think that's how heaven will be. Maybe. It'd be cool if Jesus was like, what's up, dude? And you had a secret handshake. I don't know if that's how it'll be, but it'd be pretty cool. But this guy gets to heaven. God's like, come sit at my table, eat of the food of heaven. So the guy sits down, and he's eating food, and there's an empty chair. And he looks at God and goes, what's the empty chair for? Like, who's that for? What's that about? And God goes, no, nothing. The guy goes, no. Like, who's that for? Who are we waiting for? And God goes, do you remember that person I told you to talk to? Yeah. Yeah, remember how you got scared and you didn't? Yeah. That was their chair. They're not going to be here. And I watched that and I immediately was like, ooh. Right? That doesn't feel really good. But when God asks you to do something, there's a reason. We don't serve a God that's just up there going, you know what would be fun? Let's put Kyle in a really uncomfortable situation. No, he's going, I know who Kyle can be because I created him to be something. I want him to become who I created him to be. So I'm going to put him in a situation that might be uncomfortable, that might challenge him, but it's going to cause him to either say yes to me or to say no. If he says no, I gave him that option. But if he says yes, he's going to grow into the person that I want him to be. This story with Abraham, it was not easy. Abraham didn't wake up the next day going, oh, sweet, I get to kill my son. Let's go. Right? That'd be super morbid. Right? You'd be like, ooh, Abraham's weird. Like, right? No, but he woke up and did it. My sister, when she was a little kid, would stomp whenever she had to do something she didn't want to do. And you could tell when she was mad, we'd be like, hey, you need to go do this. She'd be like, walk over to the stairs, and then you'd hear thud, 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 thud the whole way up. I wonder if that's how Abraham was with this, though. Fine, God. So it brings us back to the altar. Back to the altar. The altar is a place of worship. The altar is a place of reverence. The altar is a place where you are low. The altar is a place where God is in charge. Abraham approaches the altar having to trust God. And we're going to read the story, verses 6 through 14. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the two of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father, "Father, yes, my son, the fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Isaac's starting to realize we're missing something, because a sacrifice needs a lamb. Abraham says, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. I want us to sit in this moment for a second. How serious is your faith? Because in this moment, Abraham had every right to say, "No, that's too far." In this moment, Abraham said, "God, this is the son that you gave me. This isn't just some accident. This is the kid that you promised me. This is the kid that you gave me. This is from you. And you want me to give it back." I have a photo. You want to put that photo up, Cody, of Abraham? I like this photo a lot because you see Abraham looking up to God, and I almost wonder if Abraham's like, "God, I will do this." I want you guys to think of this for a second. Imagine that God gave you something. I want you to imagine that God showed up to your house and hands you something and said, "This is for you. I made this just for you." And you take it. And it's been something that you've been waiting for a long time. Like God originally had said, "Hey, I'm going to give you something one day." So you've been waiting, and finally he shows up and he gives it to you, and you're like, "Oh my word." And then God goes, "Okay, I want you to give it back." And you're like, "You just gave me this." And he's like, "I know. I want you to give it back." And you're like, "Well, then why did you even give it to me? Why would you even give me this if you want me to immediately give it back to you?" And God's like, "I know. I want you to give it back." Verse 10, then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham, here I am. Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld." Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. Can you put that photo back up? I want you guys to look in the lower right corner. Do you see that ram caught in the bush? He saw the ram, took the ram, and sacrificed as a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." My third point is, how should we approach the altar? How should we approach the altar? When you approach the altar, you don't come to the altar asking for what you need. When you come to the altar, you come in reverence. You don't bring your list. Oftentimes we view God a lot closer to Santa Claus than anything else, right? Is there anything wrong with asking God for something? No, nothing. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when that's all you do, when that's all you talk with him. You don't bring your list, you bring honor and respect. You don't show up thinking you have any power. Back then, things used to look a little different before Jesus showed up, but how it would work is there was a high priest, and the temple had 3 separate areas in it, but one room was called the Holy of Holies, and in that room was the Ark of the Covenant, and this was a box that God himself was in. The presence of God existed in this room, and the Holy of Holies was so powerful that when the high priest would walk in, If he hadn't cleansed and been forgiven of the sins that he had committed, he would drop dead. In order to deal with this, they had to tie a rope to the ankle of the high priest. So if he dropped dead, they could get him out. Can you imagine if that was true today? If in order to walk up to the front to worship up here, you had to make sure that you had repented of everything you had done wrong? I know that sounds extreme, but that's the God that we serve. And it's not the God, but he's so good and he's so beyond what we think that when we as sinful people come in with an alternate ego, it can't exist. When the high priest would come in with the wrong intentions, they dropped dead. So when you come to the altar, you don't come thinking you have power. We focus on a few things with God. One of the things I love are the different names that God has. Emmanuel means God with us. Jehovah Rapha means the Lord that heals. Oh, wrong. Don't put that up yet. Wrong list. Jehovah Shammah means the Lord is there. Jehovah Jireh means the Lord will provide. Jehovah Shalom means the Lord is peace. These are all names that help us feel comfortable, that help us feel safe. And I love those names. Those are amazing names. And we need the God that is peace, the God that will provide. But let's look at my name for an example. My name is not just Brogan. My name is Brogan Jeffrey Groth. Each one of my names has meaning and significance. And without them, you're not fully telling the story of who I am. Brogan is a name given to me by my parents. It's not a common name. It's a name that's set apart. It means strong, steady, and reliable. Jeffrey is my father's name. That is a name of safety and security for me. It's not ironic that I'm a lot like my dad. But it's more than that, it's a standard. My dad is a God-loving man who's a great husband, father, son, brother, friend, and worker. And so that places a standard on my life. Growth is where I'm from. It gives me a place to belong to, a place to identify with. And whether your last name is good or bad, it is the thing that propels you forward. If your last name, if you have a lot of people with your last name that have a bad upbringing, you get to change that. But if you have a family that share your last name that have a really good upbringing, you get to keep that going. My job is to represent growth well or change the definition of it. I also have other titles. I'm a youth pastor. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a friend. I'm a brother. I'm a son. I'm an uncle. All of these things have meaning to them. And once you know all those things, you begin to learn who I am. But we don't do that with God. We always focus on the super comfortable names, but we forget that he's Adonai, which means Lord and Master. That he's Alpha and Omega, which means beginning and end. El Dia, which means God of knowledge. Bor, which means Lord Creator. El Shaddai, which means Lord God Almighty. El Elyon, which means the Most High God. Adonai, I already said, Lord Master. Yahweh, which is Lord and Jehovah. Jehovah Nisi is the Lord my banner. Jehovah Ra is the Lord my shepherd. Jehovah Sindenkenu is the Lord is my righteousness. Jehovah Mekodishkim is the Lord who sanctifies you. El Olam is the everlasting God. Elohim just means God. Olam is the everlasting God. Elohim just means God. Quana means jealous. Jehovah Sabaoth means the Lord of hosts. Logos means the word. Messiah means the anointed one. Those are not comfortable names. Those are names of a God who has power. Those are names of a God who has authority. So, my last little thing that I want us to learn is a new way to worship. A new way to worship. There's the way that we worship normally, which is We stand and hands raised, and this is super good. This is super engaging. This is super fun. Sometimes worship, there's jumping or there's swaying or you just close your eyes and you have your hands out and you have your hands raised, and that's great. You lift your hands as like a sign of surrender, saying, I'm lifting praise up to God. That's amazing. That's good. I'm not saying this is bad. But there's another form of worship that takes place at the altar. Cody, can you put up that photo of the altar, please? It's early on. This is what an altar looks like. The priest would walk up that little ramp, would put the burnt sacrifice on the top of it. That's what's burning. And then would bow in reverence. Get on his knees or even on his face, would lay down on his face and would bow down. When's the last time you bowed down in the presence of God? When is the last time you got on your knees in reverence to God? The Bible talks about fear. It's not that you're scared of God, but fear is this healthy respect of you're more powerful than I am. When you come to the altar, like Abraham did, this isn't a, God, man, here's what I need. Here's what's going on. Abraham took his son, laid him on the altar, and said, God, I fully, 100% without question, submit to your will. And I give you back the thing that you promised me and that you gave me. So I want you to answer this question in your group and move on to announcements. When is the last time you showed reverence to God? And how can you do that going forward? When's the last time you showed reverence to God, and how can you do that going forward? Go.